There is an unbroken story of art which goes back 5,000 years and finds its origins in the Nile Valley. You can trace Western civilization back to the civilization which leaves its mark in the Valley of the Kings. Almost unbelievably, you can find pretty much every trace of that civilization here at Stowe. The idea of art for art's sake is quite a modern concept. Before the modern era, art was there to celebrate, to memorialize, to say something about the civilization which produces it. And here at Stowe, with the Egyptian monuments such as the Obelisk, which is like a stylus which touches the sky to celebrate the achievements of General Wolfe. We go to the Pyramid, which was built to celebrate the work of the architect and playwright John Vanbrugh. And then inside the house, we have the most unusual room at Stowe, the Egyptian entrance, which would be in the 1800s the equivalent of being confronted by a Damien Hirst installation of a shark in formaldehyde. It is that surprising. Suddenly you're back into ancient Egypt, surrounded by a sarcophagus, sphinxes, hieroglyphics, and a sense of being entombed in a mastaba, one of the ancient Egyptian pharaoh tombs. So let me take you on a journey back 5,000 years, and we'll end up in the Valley of the Kings. And this room is based on the Temple of Dendora. And when you look around, you can see some of the ideas that came to life, that were seen to be really important and were emulated by the Marquis of Buckingham when he tried to recreate ancient Egypt at Stowe. And central to this room is the source of all light, that orb of glass, a lens. And in the 1802, when the room was first constructed, this would have been lit by a candle. After that it was gas, and now of course electricity. So there you have the Egyptian god Ra, the sun god, surrounded by two cobras, the wings of the falcon. What I love about this room is the attention to detail. So it's the only place at Stowe where we don't have classical columns. The columns have these lotus leaf capitals. And then you just look underneath this beam. You've got this exquisite decorative piece, which I think is probably early Italian and not Egyptian, but probably picked up on the Grand Tour. And they wanted to find a place for it, and where better than under here. So it's a discovery that anyone can find. Above it, sadly lost, would have been the urns, which would have mimicked the urns where your vital organs were kept, preserved, ready for the next journey as you entered into the afterlife. And then here, a sarcophagus, but not really a sarcophagus, actually a heater which would have blown hot air up to the piano nobile, which is above us. As you can see, it was a little bit bigger than the one we have here. And then this shadow is where the school telephone box was. And one Richard Branson began his business empire down here in the Egyptian Hall. So there is a story here that goes back 5,000 years and ends with the Virgin Business Empire. Quite some story, isn't it? Well, I feel like Howard Carter in November 1922, having just discovered the tomb of Tutankhamun, the boy king from the 18th dynasty. In fact, I'm under the statue of Queen Caroline at Stowe, but doesn't it resemble one of these Egyptian mastabas, an ancient tomb from those Valley of the King tombs created by the pharaonic dynasties? Let's just hope that we don't have a curse of Stowe. Now, this has to be one of the most poignant memorials at Stowe. We're here near the Bourbon playing fields, and this is an obelisk to the memory of Colonel, the most noble, Richard Plantagenet Temple Nugent Chandos Bridges Grenville, the Duke of Buckingham and Chandos. That's not his entire name. In fact, the Duke had one of the longest non-repeating surnames in England. It was a 16-barreled surname. This was put up by the men of the Royal Buckinghamshire Yeomanry to honour and remember their Colonel-in-Chief. Sadly, he wasn't as distinguished in life as some of his Buckingham forebears. He's probably best remembered for hosting Queen Victoria and Prince Albert in 1845. But the family was in serious financial trouble. It's said that the bailiffs dressed up in the Buckinghamshire Yeomanry uniform and acted as pageants and servants for the royal visit. Secretly, they were going round eyeing up the antiquities, the art and the sculpture. 3 years later, in 1848, there was an enormous sale of all of the art and the antiquities. Buckingham thought that this was going to get him out of trouble, bail him out. It raised a rather meagre £75,000, which barely made a dent into the £1 million that he actually owed, the equivalent of about £100 million in today's money. But here it is, another obelisk, and just looking over to the field across, we've got the Bourbon Tower, and it's from here that the second Duke used to orchestrate the Buckinghamshire Yeomanry as they went on manoeuvres. And if you were to do some archaeological digging, you would still find the grape shot and the cannonballs which were fired here as part of the military exercises. So evocative and rather sad, but still a link back to ancient Egypt. Pyramids, such as the three that can be found at Giza in Egypt, were monuments to the pharaohs. The pharaohs were able to organise their society in an incredibly complex way. It would require thousands of people to quarry the stone, to bring the stone together to construct a pyramid. And these mausoleums were there to be able to lift the soul, that sense of Ka, the spirit, going up, so that these semi-divine creatures, the pharaohs, could rejoin the gods after their death. And this is what we have here at Stowe, a pyramid that recreates that sense of majesty and awe in the sight of the gods. Now, this has to be one of the most poignant sites on the whole estate. Here we are. These are the ruins of the Vanbrugh Pyramid. This was a temple that was designed by John Vanbrugh, but was actually constructed after his death. It begins in around 1726 under the supervision of James Gibbs. Unfortunately, the building was always rather unreliable. The stone started crumbling. By 1771, the top pyramid had been removed, and there was an idea that Earl Temple had to put 4 statues up and create it into an open-air mausoleum. The figures would have comprised George Grenville, William Pitt, Earl Chatham, we would have had George Littleton, and there would have been space for Earl Temple himself. The idea is to bring this part of Stowe, a forgotten garden, a dilapidated relic of something that was once beautiful, to bring this back and to restore it. Not just to the memory of John Vanbrugh, but to the memory of all the old Stoics who gave their lives in World War II for the same principles of freedom and democracy, so that we can live our lives in peace, in freedom, and continue to enjoy these wonderful surroundings. I'm here at the ha-ha. Now, the ha-ha wasn't invented at Stowe. It's probably a French invention. But here we have the longest, the largest ha-ha in the United Kingdom. The origins of the word are slightly obscure. It's thought that it comes from people falling into the ditches and going ha-ha, surprise, and the name stuck. The reason I'm showing you this ha-ha is because it gives us an idea of what the facing stone of the pyramid looked like. The pyramid was dismantled in the 1780s. Most of the stones went back to the stone yard and were incorporated in later buildings. The menagerie, we think, benefited. Some of the stone may have ended up on the ha-ha itself, but it gives us a sense of the scale and the height. I'm 2 meters tall. This is so 6 foot. The ha-ha gives us an idea of scale. This is probably about 8-9 foot. The pyramid, when it was fully built, went up to 60 feet. And this was the sort of stone which would have been used to face the pyramid. Again, remarkably evocative of the trio of pyramids at Giza. What an extraordinary sight that must have been. We're now at Wolf's Obelisk. Normally obelisks are made of granite and they point to the sky. They're like a stylus that just scratches the clouds as they pass over. This obelisk is 100 foot high. It was built in 1754, another good example of Stowe recycling, because the stones come from the Giuglio, the fountain in the Octagon Lake, and they were reassembled here. It was then rededicated in 1759 to honour one of our greatest soldiers, General James Wolfe. Now, Wolfe spent his last night in England before he went to Canada to take part in the 7 Years' War at Stowe. He was one of Earl Temple's great friends. And Wolfe's greatest achievements after he had reformed the army was to lead the British into battle. This was a monumental battle for North America. On the 13th of September 1759, Wolfe took 4,400 men up the St. Lawrence River. They landed just west of Quebec. They brought with them a couple of field guns. They then scaled cliffs that were 200 meters high, and they engaged the enemy. The enemy, led by the Marquis de Montcalm, were completely taken by surprise. They hadn't thought that the British army could scale those cliffs. All their defences were pointing the wrong way. The battle commenced. It lasted only 15 minutes. And during the battle, Wolfe was injured. He was shot in the arm and the shoulder and the chest. The final wound was a mortal wound. As he lay dying, he heard one of his officers saying, "They flee." Wolfe said, "Who flees?" And the officer said, "The enemy. They run in all directions." And Wolfe, with his dying breath, said, "Now God be praised. I can die in peace." And this is his monument. One of Wolfe's favourite poems was Thomas Gray's Elegy, written in an English churchyard. And one of its lines is that the paths to fame lead to a grave. And this is Wolfe's obelisk. This is his grave. This is his mausoleum. And it's a tribute to his greatness. It's also a tribute from a friend, Earl Temple. And it's a monument to the beginning of empire, which in 1759 unfolds. The French only retained Louisiana. The British were dominant. This was an empire that lasted 200 years, that was to scatter pretty much all empires before, the greatest empire the world has known, a quarter of the world's landmass. Of course now, a historic legacy, tainted, toxic, controversial. But in the 18th century, this is when the sun begins to shine on the British Empire. And of course, the sun never set on the British Empire. So big was its extent.